The sun was a red coin sinking into the edge of the desert when the widow of Red Creek carried her last bucket of water from the well. The wind had died, leaving only the whisper of dry grass and the groan of her porch boards. Sarah Whitlow set the bucket down beside the steps, wiped her hands on her apron, and stared toward the canyon rim where the light bled gold over the pine-tipped cliffs. In that dying glow, her small ranch looked lonelier than ever. A handful of fences, a weathered barn, and a cabin too quiet for the sound of two hearts. It had been 6 years since Eli vanished into the high country. 6 winters without his voice. 6 springs without a shadow at the door. They said he'd died trapping up near Crow Peak, swallowed by a blizzard that no man could survive. But sometimes, when the wind came out of the pines, Sarah swore she could hear his deep laugh in the gusts. Folks in town still whispered about him. The giant trapper, who once took down a bear with a skinning knife. The man who never missed his shot. The man who married a woman too gentle for his wild heart. She had buried his rifle behind the cabin once, just to stop the ache of looking at it, but somehow it always found its way back to the wall. Red Creek was a hard place to be a widow. The town's single street cut through dust and saloon smoke, and every window seemed to watch her ride in once a week for supplies. Men tipped their hats out of pity. Women lowered their voices when she passed. Lately, fear had settled over the place thicker than the desert dust. A gang calling themselves Harrow's Boys had started appearing from the south, robbing ranches, burning barns, taking what they pleased. They were led by a tall man with a cruel grin, Cold Harrow, a name spoken like a curse. That morning, they'd ridden through Red Creek in a cloud of dust, 7 of them, their laughter like crows in the street. Sarah had been at the mercantile when Cole dismounted, boots scraping against the porch as he strode inside. "You folks got a fine little town," he'd said, his voice smooth as whiskey and twice as dangerous. "But protection don't come free." Nobody answered. The old storekeeper kept his eyes on the counter, pretending to polish the same tin mug. Colt turned his gaze to Sarah, taking in the widow's clean dress, the steady way she held herself. "You live out near the canyon, don't you, ma'am?" Sarah nodded once, careful not to tremble. "Pretty place. Lonely. Shame if anything happened to it. I'll come by tomorrow for your share." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy, then walked out, leaving the door swinging in his wake. By evening, the whole town knew he'd meant it. They said he'd burned the Baxter farm 2 valleys over when they refused him. They said he'd shoot a man just to hear his wife cry. Sarah packed her provisions in silence, saddled her mule, and rode home with the sun falling fast behind her. Now, as she stood on her porch, she looked toward the horizon. The last light faded from the sky, and with it went her courage. Still, she wouldn't run. This ranch had been Eli's dream, carved out of stone and sweat. If she left, his memory would die with the wind. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and coffee gone cold. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat beside the lamp, her hands clasped in prayer, though her lips never moved. The tick of the old clock filled the silence. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, answered by another farther off. From the dark ridge above her home, a shadow moved between the pines. Broad-shouldered, silent, it watched the cabin below, the faint lamplight flickering against its window. The figure crouched, breath misting in the chill air. He had been following the Harrow gang for 3 days now, from the southern mesas, where they'd left 3 dead ranches behind. He knew their leader by name, knew the sound of his laugh, but he hadn't expected the trail to lead back here to her. Eli Ward had not spoken her name aloud in years. He had let the mountains claim him, living half as man, half as ghost, because to stay would have meant bringing death to her door. But when he'd heard of a widow near Red Creek refusing to bow to bandits, something in him stirred, like a bear roused from sleep. He leaned on his old Sharp's rifle, its barrel dull with age but clean, polished each night beside his campfire. Down below, a candle burned in her window. He could almost see her silhouette move past the curtain, her same slow grace, the tilt of her head when she thought of something far away. He whispered her name once, so softly even the trees barely caught it. Sarah. Inside the cabin, Sarah froze. For an instant, she felt it, like someone calling across miles of silence. The flame of the lamp flickered though no draft stirred. She rose, went to the window, and peered out into the dark. The canyon beyond was a sea of black, the pines whispering secrets to one another. She told herself it was only the wind. At the edge of the canyon, Eli turned and melted into the shadows, his moccasins silent on the pine needles. He had to be sure. Colt Harrow would come for her by sundown tomorrow, and Eli Ward had already decided, this time, he wouldn't vanish into the storm. Morning came with a sky the color of ash. Sarah rose early, fed the chickens, mended the fence. Every motion felt sharper, every sound louder. A hawk circled above the fields, crying into the still air. Around noon, she saw dust rising far off on the southern road. She went inside, took Eli's rifle down from the wall, and checked the chamber. Her hands were steady. By mid-afternoon, the town of Red Creek lay silent under the heat. The people stayed behind shutters, pretending not to watch the road. Somewhere beyond the canyon, hoofbeats echoed faintly, slow and deliberate. Up in the pines, Eli waited. He could see the whole valley stretched beneath him. The widow's cabin, the grazing land, the road curling like a scar through the hills. He saw the 7 riders emerge, their coats black, their laughter carried thin by the wind. He watched as Sarah stepped onto her porch, alone but unflinching. Eli adjusted the sight on his rifle, exhaled, and felt something old and fierce settle in his chest. He had hunted wolves, cougars, and men worse than either, but this was different. This was the life he'd walked away from now staring back at him. The rider stopped 100 yards from her gate. Colt dismounted slowly, dust rising around his boots. "Morning, Widow Whitlow," he called, voice smooth and cruel. "I came for what's owed." Sarah didn't move. "There's nothing here for you." "Oh, there's always something. Folks like you just need reminding." He smiled and tipped his hat. The others chuckled behind him, rifles slung lazy over their shoulders. In that suspended moment, the whole valley held its breath. The sun hung low, turning the dust into gold. The sound of a bird's cry split the silence, and from high on the ridge came another sound, faint but unmistakable, the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Colt turned sharply toward the hills, eyes narrowing. Sarah didn't look away. She couldn't, because deep inside her heart, something she thought long dead had begun to stir, like the memory of a voice carried on the wind. Eli saw her lift her chin, saw the defiance in her eyes. Pride and pain twisted inside him. He had promised himself never to be seen again, but the sight of Colt Harrow, standing on her land, burned away every vow he'd made to the wilderness. The morning broke pale and brittle over Red Creek, a sky of ash and thin sunlight stretching across the Badlands. Sarah Whitlow stood on her porch with a cup of cold coffee, her eyes fixed on the distant road that cut through the valley like an old scar. The silence of dawn held its breath. Even the birds had gone quiet, sensing what the wind already carried, the sound of riders. At first it was only dust rising beyond the ridge, faint and trembling in the distance. Then came the low thunder of hooves, a rhythm that made her heart tighten. 7 shapes emerged from the haze, their shadows long against the sand. They rode in a crooked line, black coats fluttering, rifles slung careless across their backs. Colt Harrow rode at the head, tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low to hide the smile that never reached his eyes. Sarah stepped down from the porch, the wood creaking under her boots. She had dressed in the same simple gray dress she'd worn to her husband's funeral years ago, as though mourning were something she had learned to wear like armor. In her hands, she held Eli's shotgun, heavy and cold, the metal biting her palms. When the riders reached the gate, Colt reined in his horse, the animal snorting and stamping. "Mornin', widow," he called, his voice smooth as oil. "Told you I'd be back." Sarah said nothing. Colt leaned forward on the saddle horn, studying her face. "You got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit don't keep barns from burning. You pay, or you pack up. Last chance." "I don't owe you a damn thing," she said, her voice low but steady. One of the men chuckled, a high, ugly sound. "She's got a mouth on her, Colt. Maybe we take the ranch and let her keep the outhouse." The gang laughed. Colt smiled lazily, chewing a sliver of tobacco. Careful, boys. The lady's armed. Sarah raised the shotgun a fraction, aiming low. You'll ride off my land, she said, or you'll crawl off it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Colt's eyes narrowed. He flicked his wrist, and a shot rang out, one of his men firing into the dirt by her feet. The explosion cracked the morning wide open, echoing off the canyon walls. Dust flew up around her boots, but Sarah didn't flinch. She stood frozen, heart pounding, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her throat. Colt laughed softly. You got nerve, widow. I like that. He turned his horse in a slow circle, surveying the ranch. Nice spread you got here. Shame if something happened to it. On the ridge high above them, a pair of eyes watched through a spyglass. Eli Ward crouched behind a fallen log, the glass steady in his scarred hands. The years had carved him down to muscle and bone, his beard flecked with gray, his face weathered by snow and solitude. He had tracked this gang for days, sleeping in canyons, drinking from creeks, waiting for the moment he dreaded most, the day their trail led straight to her. Now he watched her standing on that porch, her hair catching the light like spun copper, the same proud defiance he'd fallen in love with still burning in her stance. He felt something inside him shift, an old wound reopening. He had left her to keep her safe from the violence he carried in his blood, but the world had found her anyway. Through the glass, he saw Colt dismount, swaggering toward her gate. Eli's hands clenched around the rifle stock. Burn the barn, Colt said over his shoulder. Maybe that'll loosen her tongue. Two men peeled off toward the barn, laughing as they sloshed a can of kerosene across the boards. Sarah's breath hitched as the scent reached her. She took a step forward, lifting the shotgun higher. Stop, Colt turned, smiling like a man humoring a child. You can still make this easy. Her finger trembled on the trigger. You'll ride out of here, Colt Harrow, or God help me. He cut her off with a sneer. God ain't watching this valley, lady. Only me. Behind him, one of the men struck a match. The barn caught quick, first a whisper of smoke, then a rush of flame that roared up the dry boards. The air filled with heat and panic, the horses screaming from their pen. From the ridge, Eli's rifle lifted. He drew in a breath, long and measured, the world narrowing to the space between his finger and the trigger. The shot cracked like lightning splitting the sky. Down below, the man nearest the fire jerked backward, the match tumbling from his fingers as he crumpled into the dirt. For a second, no one understood what had happened. Then chaos erupted. Sniper, someone screamed. Up in the ridge. Colt spun, drawing his pistol. Find him. Eli worked the bolt with a quiet rhythm, his movements precise, practiced. He had hunted elk on the slopes of the Rockies, wolves in the timberline, men in the war. The habits never left him. He fired again, the report echoing through the valley. Another outlaw stumbled, clutching his shoulder, blood dark against his shirt. The remaining men scattered for cover, diving behind rocks and fences. Bullets whined through the air, kicking up dirt near Sarah's boots. She ducked behind a barrel, heart hammering, the acrid smoke of the burning barn swirling around her. Through the haze, she saw Colt shouting orders, his face twisted with rage. Fan out. He's up there somewhere. But none of them dared to ride toward the ridge. The canyon wind carried whispers, legends the frontier had never forgotten. They spoke of a giant who vanished into the mountains years ago, a man who could shoot the wings off a crow from half a mile away. Sarah pressed her back against the cabin wall, coughing from the smoke. The fire had taken hold of the barn roof, collapsing it in a shower of sparks. She gripped the shotgun tighter, though she knew she couldn't match the men's rifles. The sound of that single distant gunshot had shaken something deep in her, something she hadn't felt in years. She risked a glance toward the canyon rim. The light caught on something metallic, a glint like sun off glass. Then it was gone. Eli shifted his position, crawling along the ridge, keeping to the shadows of the pines. He could see Colt's men crouching behind a wagon, firing wildly into the trees. None came close. He lined up his next shot, steady as a statue. Below, Colt cursed and kicked at the dirt. "Show yourself, damn you!" he roared into the wind. "You think you can scare me with ghost stories." But the fear was there, in his voice, in the way his hand shook when he reloaded. Sarah peeked around the corner, just as Eli's third shot rang out. The bullet tore through a bandit's hat and buried itself in the post behind him. The man yelped and dove to the ground, crawling away like a wounded dog. The others began to mutter, eyes darting to the canyon. One spat on the ground. "Ain't no man shoots like that." Another crossed himself. "It's him. The trapper. The one they said was dead." "Shut your mouth," Colt barked. But he, too, looked toward the ridge, unease creeping through the swagger. The fire in the barn burned itself down to black smoke. The only sounds now were the wind and the horses, snorting nervously in their corral. The outlaws hesitated, guns still drawn but courage fading fast. Colt mounted up, his jaw tight. "We're not done here," he snarled, pointing a finger at Sarah. "Next time, there won't be no ghosts on you." He wheeled his horse and galloped off, the others following in a flurry of dust and curses. In moments, they were gone, just the echo of hooves and the smell of smoke lingering in the valley. The night settled thick over Red Creek, pressing down with the weight of storm clouds and silence. The canyon breathed mist, curling like smoke from the stones, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and gunpowder. Cold Harrow's campfire flickered in the hollow of the rocks, its glow too small to warm the men who huddled around it. They'd lost 2 that morning to a rifle they never saw, and the rest were pale with fear. Colt stared into the flames, jaw working, eyes burning with something colder than rage. "We'll smoke him out," he said, voice flat as steel. "Whoever's protecting that woman, he dies slow." No one answered. One of his men, Finch, the youngest, shifted nervously. "Colt, what if it ain't a man? Folks talk about a giant in these parts. A trapper who went mad in the woods. Some say he—" Colt's hand shot out, backhanding him hard enough to spill blood. "You talk like that again, I'll feed you to the coyotes myself." The wind rose, carrying the sound of their fire snapping. Beyond the canyon, the pines stood black and endless. In the shifting light, they seemed to move. Far above them, hidden among the trees, Eli Ward crouched in the shadows. His breath came slow and even, each exhale a thin thread of mist. The rifle rested steady against his shoulder, its metal dark with soot and care. He could see the glow of the campfire below, and hear every nervous word they spoke. He'd hunted wolves that moved quieter than these men. He'd once sworn never to take another life unless he had to. But that was before they came for her. Eli turned his head slightly, and moonlight brushed his face, the lines carved deep by years in the wilderness, eyes like winter sky. Somewhere down in the valley, a whippoorwill cried. He listened to it fade, then moved. He was part of the forest, his moccasins whispering over the ground, body gliding through the ferns and mist. They said he moved like a spirit, half man, half shadow, born of the pines. Back at her cabin, Sarah sat in darkness. The fire burned low to embers. The night outside pulsed with life. Every branch creak and coyote call felt close enough to touch. She couldn't shake the image of the men riding off that morning, nor the echo of that rifle crack that had saved her life. Her hands trembled as she poured herself water, spilling half of it onto the table. Then she saw it, something lying on the porch just beyond the door. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as she stepped closer, her breath caught. A wolf's tooth, strung on a strip of leather, old and worn. She sank to her knees, the world narrowing around her. Her fingers brushed the tooth, and memory flooded in. The warmth of his hands as he'd tied it around his own neck. His laugh when she'd teased him about keeping trophies. "A wolf never gives up its tooth easy," he'd said. "Means it was earned." Her tears fell silently. She pressed the charm to her lips. "Eli," she whispered into the cold air. "You're out there, aren't you?" The cabin walls seemed to breathe with her. She blew out the lamp and sat in the dark, clutching that token, listening for the sound she once knew, the low, steady rhythm of his boots returning from the hills. In the canyon below, Colt Harrow's men tried to sleep, but the night offered no rest. The fire dimmed, and shadows thickened between the rocks. The oldest of them, Pike, sat apart, rolling a cigarette with trembling hands. "It ain't right," he muttered. "Ain't no man shoots like that." You didn't see his size in the tree lean, Colt. He's big, too big. Colt ignored him, staring at the fire until the smoke blurred his vision. You want stories? Here's one. Every man dies the same. Big, small, legend or not. You bleed him right. He stays dead. But his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. He'd been in gunfights across half the frontier. He'd seen killers, bounty men, soldiers turned mad. But the way those shots came down from the ridge, one after another, clean and merciless, hadn't been human. It had been judgment. Something rustled in the trees. The horses whinnied, restless, hooves scraping against stone. Colt rose, scanning the darkness. Pike, he hissed. Check that. Pike swallowed, nodded, and stepped toward the brush. His boots sank into the damp earth. He turned the corner of the rock, peering into the shadows. A soft click broke the silence, the sound of a trigger being drawn back. The shot came and went before the sound reached camp. Pike dropped without a cry, his hat rolling into the firelight. The men jumped to their feet, shouting, guns flashing up. Where is he? Finch screamed, spinning wildly. Another shot tore through the night, striking the tin cup beside Finch's head, sending it spinning. He fell backward, scrambling into the dirt. Eli moved among the pines, silent, methodical. He knew their habits, their fear. Every step they took revealed them more. He watched the way Colt kept to the center, barking orders, but flinching at every echo. He watched the others scatter, turning on one another, panic shapes in the mist. He'd learned the forest's voice long ago. How to walk in rhythm with its silence. How to use the wind to hide the sound of breath. He was no ghost, but to men like them, he might as well have been. One broke and ran, stumbling through the undergrowth, sobbing. Eli let him go for a while. Then he whistled, soft and low, the same call he'd once used to lure coyotes near his traps. The man froze. In that moment, Eli fired. The shot echoed down the canyon like thunder. By dawn, only 3 remained. Colt's eyes were bloodshot, rage boiling through his exhaustion. He's no spirit, he said hoarsely. He's a man. The trapper of Red Creek. I remember the stories now. Big bastard used to sell furs in Fort Mason. Disappeared after killing a marshal. Finch shook his head violently. You're talking about a dead man. Folks said he froze to death in the mountains. Then why's he shooting at us? Colt snarled. Finch didn't answer. He stared at the trees instead, at the shifting gray where dawn began to touch the mist. Maybe he came back. Something cracked deep in the forest, wood splitting, branches shifting. Both men raised their rifles, hearts pounding, but nothing moved. Just that whispering wind again, low and cold, like laughter. Colt lowered his gun slowly, his pulse hammering. He thought of the widow, her face calm even when his men fired at her feet. What did she know? Was she in on it? No, he decided. She was bait, and the trapper, whatever he was, would come for her again. Back at the cabin, Sarah sat at her window, the sky just beginning to pale. The wolves had gone quiet, and for a brief moment, she felt peace. The tooth still lay against her palm. She traced the grooves in it, remembering his voice, his warmth, the way he'd looked back at her that morning before leaving for the mountains, like a man trying to memorize the light. I'll come back when you need me, he'd said. And now she knew he had. In the gray light of dawn, Colt Harrow stood over the bodies of his dead men. He spat into the dirt, jaw tight. The legend wasn't a rumor anymore. It had a face. He turned toward the ridge, toward the pines that shimmered with morning fog. All right, trapper, he muttered. You want a war? You got one. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound through the trees, the echo of a rifle bolt sliding into place, the whisper of breath before a storm. Dawn came bleeding through the pines, pale and cold, the kind of light that made the world look carved out of bone. Sarah Whitlow woke to the sound of hoofbeats and the crack of a rifle echoing off the canyon walls. The coffee pot slipped from her hands, shattering on the stove. She ran to the window and froze. Dust was rising from the south ridge. Colt Harrow and what remained of his gang were coming for her. She backed away from the glass, breath sharp and shallow. The shotgun leaned by the door, same as always, but this morning it felt useless. Her hand shook as she loaded the shells anyway, whispering to herself, "You won't take this place. You won't take me." Outside, the outlaws fanned out across the yard, the shouts tearing through the still air. Colt's voice carried loudest. "Bring her out. No more warnings." Then a sound broke through the low, distant crack of a rifle. One of Colt's men pitched forward off his horse before he could draw. Another dropped beside the fence, his scream swallowed by the echo that followed. The gunfire came from the ridge above, too clean, too calm. Colt's head snapped toward the canyon. His face went white, then twisted in rage. "He's here." Eli Ward moved through the trees like the land itself was guiding him. The sun hit his rifle barrel in quick flashes, the only sign of him at all. He'd rigged the canyon with the traps he'd once used for grizzlies and wolves, tripwires, snares, pits. The ground here was his ally. When the second outlaw fired toward the ridge, the shot ricocheted off rock and sent him tumbling into a hidden pit lined with sharpened stakes. His scream was brief, then gone. Colt spun toward the remaining men. "Flank him. He's one man." But Eli wasn't just one man anymore. He was every shadow, every whisper of wind between the pines. He fired again, and another outlaw fell. The air filled with smoke and chaos. Horses reared and broke free, their hooves pounding into the dust. Colt ducked behind the well, cursing. Down by the cabin, Sarah crouched behind the porch, clutching her shotgun. The battle rolled across the valley like thunder. She could smell the gunpowder and the smoke, the sharp tang of fear. And beneath it all, something else, the deep, steady rhythm of a man who fought like he'd already died once and come back for vengeance. The last of Colt's men tried to run for the barn, shouting, "He's everywhere. God help us." The words barely left his mouth before Eli's rifle cracked again, and silence fell. Colt was alone now. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning wood. Smoke began to curl from the barn doors. One of the bullets must have caught the oil lamp inside. The fire spread quick, licking through the hay, climbing the beams. Sarah stood and ran toward it, shouting for the horses still trapped inside. Colt saw her break from the porch and moved fast, cutting her off near the barn. "You," he snarled, grabbing her arm. "You called him, didn't you? You brought that monster down on me." Sarah struggled, kicking, but he was stronger. "He's not a monster," she gasped. "He's justice." He backhanded her hard, sending her sprawling in the dirt. His pistol gleamed in the firelight as he leveled it at her chest. "Then justice dies with you." Before he could pull the trigger, the barn doors exploded outward, a wall of flame and smoke. Out of it came a shape too large, too fast to be real. Eli burst through the fire like a ghost forged in hell, his coat smoking, eyes burning gold in the light. Colt staggered back, stunned. "You." Eli's voice was low, ragged. "You should have stayed out of Red Creek." Colt fired twice, the shots thudding into Eli's shoulder and side. The giant barely flinched. He closed the distance in a few long strides, his hand slamming into Colt's chest and sending him crashing into a post. The two men fought in the burning glow, fists, fire, fury. Colt drew his knife, slashing wildly. Eli caught his wrist, twisted, and the blade fell to the ground. Colt swung again, landing a hard blow to Eli's jaw, but the trapper didn't stop. He drove forward, lifting Colt off the ground, slamming him into the wall. The flames roared around them, with snapping and sparks raining down like stars. "You killed my men." Colt spat, blood mixing with smoke. "You killed my peace," Eli growled, his voice breaking with pain and memory. "You touched what's mine." Colt grabbed a burning beam and swung it. It struck Eli's back, searing flesh. The trapper roared, grabbing Colt by the throat. With one final surge of strength, he hurled him into the heart of the fire. Colt's scream rose, then vanished beneath the roar of collapsing timber. Eli stumbled back, chest heaving, his shirt soaked red. He turned toward Sarah, who was running to him through the smoke. Her eyes widened, tears streaking through the soot. "Eli," he tried to smile. "Told you I'd come back when you needed me." She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. "Don't you dare leave me again," she whispered. He reached up, brushing her cheek with a shaking hand. "You're safe now." The barn's roof gave way, sending sparks into the sky. The light painted their faces gold. Eli's hand fell limp against her shoulder. The sound of hooves came from the ridge, townsfolk who had heard the gunfire arriving too late. They found Sarah kneeling in the dust, Eli's head in her lap, the dawn spreading over them in bands of rose and amber. The fire had died down to embers, the air thick with the smell of smoke and earth. Someone approached quietly. "Is he?" Sarah didn't answer. She looked down at him, at the stillness that felt too deep for death. For a moment, she swore she saw his chest rise once more, a faint breath, a whisper of life. But when she blinked, he was gone. All that remained beside her was his rifle, the wolf's tooth charm glinting in the morning sun. She lifted it with trembling fingers, holding it against her heart as tears fell silently onto the scorched earth. Later, they said the fire had burned itself out with no wind to feed it, like even nature knew when to be still. The people of Red Creek buried what little they found and rebuilt what they could. But some nights, when the fog rolled down from the hills and the pines whispered low, travelers swore they saw a figure standing at the canyon's edge, tall, broad-shouldered, coat stirring in the wind. They said the giant trapper still watched the valley, guarding the woman he once loved, and no outlaw, no matter how bold, ever rode through Red Creek again.